Hey everybody, this is herculespetix, founder, curator, docent, and gift shop employee of the herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies. Today we're going to be looking at comics book number 2, continuing our examination of this underground comic actually published and distributed by Marvel Comics in 1974. Still hard to believe that this is real. Start off with a very odd Skip Williamson cover. It's a typical nice cartooning from Skip Williamson, but something about the composition, I can't even picture this on the newsstands. It's such an odd cover. It must have looked very weird. Then again, maybe people picked it up because they were like, what the hell is this? We have an inside front cover from Kim Deitch, Old Home Week. And this is a little gag strip featuring his aging hippie characters, Krishna Horowitz and Eddie O'Schmey. And it's pretty funny. We have the little introduction editorial here, talking about all the contributors. Once again, we get some nice Dennis Kitchen illos, which is always a treat. And then we have The Wide World of Comics by Richard Meltzer. This was in the first issue. It's so weird. It's just this gossip column about underground comics. But then they talk about shoes, just all these random things that are just the author, Richard Meltzer, wants to talk about. I forgot to mention this last time. Actually, I didn't know this. I knew his name seemed familiar. I know Richard Meltzer. I know who he is. He was a rock journalist. And then when Blue Oyster Cult was just forming, he was hanging out with all those guys. He was never a member of the band, but he wrote like the lyrics to like 9 of their songs, including Burning for You. So if the guy's still alive, I'm sure he's doing just fine just from the royalties of that song. Then later on, maybe a few years later, he was in Vom, the punk band that was like a precursor to the Angry Samoans. So kind of weird. And I'd like to read more about this guy. He seems like quite a character. First story here is Working for the Aliens by Sharon Rudall. And this is kind of an autobio comic that takes a left turn. Sharon Rudall's talking about how hard it is to be a female underground cartoonist. Almost all the editors are like kind of dissing her and just like, oh yeah, you'll be good. Maybe in a couple years you'll be ready for young smut. So because of that, she gets a job as a graphic designer at this huge corporation. So it's a very dull job. I mean, she's pasting things up. It's not creative or anything. But she notices something strange about her fellow employees. Their skin is blotchy, and it almost seems like it's worn away in patches. And she starts to have it happen to her, too. She's getting skin blemishes. And one day she overhears the executives, and she finds out that they're aliens. She gets a call from a friend who basically lets her know that, you got accepted for some of these underground comics and for doing cover design of a magazine. So she resigns. And her boss basically says, oh, yeah, the way the economy is, you'll be back. And his jacket opens. This is a really creepy panel. And we see his alienness. And as she runs away screaming, he repeats, you'll be back. A Day in the Life. This is a Ted Richards comic. Hippo Airlines Flight 9 now boarding at Gate 5. And this is just about this hippie airline. I don't think there really was one. And they don't hassle you about wearing seatbelts. The oxygen masks have nitrous oxide in them. It's a big party on the plane. And the pilot is just hanging out with the passengers. He's got the plane on autopilot. And it's just flying around crazy. So they finally land. And everyone's kissing the ground. They're just like, ah. And, but they land in the wrong place. They land in this deep south. And a sheriff is waiting there to bust them all. Really nice cartooning from Ted Murphy. I love his stuff. Very classic Bigfoot cartooning. Here we have The Bill Bland Show by Joel Beck. And, yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Joel Beck. But he does have this kind of cute little classic style. It's okay, I guess. But all of his strips are just simple gag strips. He's barely underground. He usually his stuff could be in Mad Magazine, And it rarely makes me laugh. Maybe one strip made me chuckle a little. But it's just, I don't know. It's not my cup of tea. Basically, Bill Bland is interviewing this dolphin. And this dolphin's gone all Hollywood. He's talking about having a spot on Flipper. It's all about the fish. We're all in it for the fish. That's what the dolphin says. So the dolphins have been corrupted by humans. Next we have Snappy Sammy Smoot in Sammy Encounters the Black Mafia by Skip Williamson. God, this cartooning is great. Some of these panels are so nice. I love this landlady here. So it's the first of the month. Sammy's landlady says either pay up or you're out on your ass by 6 p.m. So he's got to come up with $50. And he finds some baby powder and he tries to sell it on the streets as heroin. And then this black guy shows up and he says, hey, white boy, this is my neighborhood. That's my job, man. And of course, Sammy's terrified. It's interesting how she looks very much like, this hippie looks very much like Pudge Girl Blimp, the Lee Mars ground level comic. So the black mafiosa ushers Sammy into this big pimp mobile, and they tie him up. And the head of the black mafia basically says, you're not going to get away with this. You're dead. We're going to kill you. But before he does, he says, well, let me try some of this shit you've been peddling. And he takes a snort. I guess Sammy, though, cut the talcum powder with Drano. And the mafia don, his head explodes. And then all the other mafiosa start fighting over who's going to be the new boss. And they all kill each other, leaving Sammy safe and sound. And Sammy realizes, they got a lot of money on him. He takes all their money so he can pay his rent. But then that night he reads in the newspaper, entire generation dead of drug overdose. And all Sammy can think about is whatever shall I do about next month's rent? It's pretty funny stuff. So this next one's very interesting. It's called Gilda's Goose. And it's written and drawn by Mike Plug. And just a few weeks ago, we looked at, what was that? Big Apple Comics had a Mike Plug strip in it that you could really see his Will Eisner influence. Because he basically worked for Will Eisner, apprenticed kind of under him when he was a young artist. But this strip, man, I would totally think this was Will Eisner. Look at this. It looks great. This is good stuff. But it looks very much like Will Eisner. Even the smoke in the ceiling here. This is basically just illustrating an old joke. It's pretty goofy. This woman walks into a bar with a goose. This old drunk says, what'd you bring that pig in here for? And she says, I beg your pardon. This is not a pig. This is a goose. And he says, I was talking to the goose. And then she starts hitting him on the head with the goose. Pretty goofy. We have a little artist profile of Justin Green. This is pretty interesting. Talks about how he got into underground comics, and talks about his weird Catholic guilt thing. This is kind of nice, kind of historically important. They have a complete chronological checklist of everything Justin Green has ever printed. Kind of neat. Now we have the second chapter of Panthea by Trina Robbins. So where we left off, Panthea is with this guy who she thinks is her liberator from her previous captor. He just wants to sell her to someone for himself. So they're taking a cruise ship to Morocco. While she's in the dining room, the waiter hands her a note from Herr Werner von Hauptmann. He requests her presence at his table. So he says that on the docks, I saw you talking to those native women in an accent I've never heard before. It made me very curious. So she's very naive about human ways. So she comes up to his room and he says, I can use as many black girls as you can supply. They trust you. He's trying to hire her to basically procure black women for his slave operation. And I guess he tells her, do you know that some men will pay $5,000 to kill a girl? So these women are basically just going to be killed and tortured by sick perverts. God, that's such a weird face there. Trina Robbins. And of course, when Panthea hears this, she's outraged, pulls off her jacket and reveals her strange form. And she attacks him. Later on, we see Top Ship. Panthea comes back to that guy. I can't remember his name right now. He's got a weird name like Mongo or Mojo. And all of a sudden, they hear someone yell, Eek! Herr Hauptmann has been horribly murdered. It looks like the work of some wild beast. And her companion nonchalantly just says, better wipe your chin. Got some blood on it. And she says, thanks. And they just look into the water. And that's how the comic ends. I'm kind of intrigued by this whole thing. Like, this guy's is going to sell her or wants to sell her. But it's almost like they have something's growing between him, or I don't know. Who knows what's going to happen. But I am pretty intrigued by this. Now we have Foggy Bottom, another strip by Bill Sanders, the political cartoonist. This is not very good. This is just very typical middle-of-the-road political humor. This politician is trying to sell his autobiography, and this publisher is trying to jazz it up. It's like, is there a sex scandal? Did you, take money from the government till? And it's just like, no, I worked for the people. I was a good politician. And of course, he's just like, that'll never sell. So it's just a commentary on how corrupt politicians are. Pretty lame, to be honest. He's a decent cartoonist. He's got that very typical political cartoonist style that you see in all the newspapers. Next, we have Two Fools in the Spoils of War by Ted Richards and Willie Murphy. So last issue, we saw a Two Fool strip where Ted Richards teamed up with Justin Green, and now he's teaming up with Willie Murphy, which I love because both of these guys, they've got such classic cartooning chops, like that just funny style of drawing. They could have drawn like Mutt and Jeff if they wanted to, just really good stuff. They're the kind of artists who just draw funny. Just looking at their characters, I kind of chuckle. So it's a Civil War, and we see the Union and the Confederacy forces fighting on a battle, and then they both retreat to the front lines, and there's a calm in the fighting. Both of the generals of each army look out, and they see that there's a chicken dying in the field of war where they were just fighting. And I guess they're thinking about how, we could eat that chicken tonight. We don't have really much food. So they each send their crappiest soldier, basically, because it's a suicide mission. I mean, they're going into the no man's land just to get this chicken. And they run out there and they're yanking the chicken, having a tug of war with it. And then all of a sudden they rip it in half. That's a great panel. And they look both ways. And they're so dumb, they don't even realize, the generals are obviously looking at you with binoculars. I mean, they're watching. And they try to tape the chicken back up together as if, nothing happened. A case of no harm, no foul. Sorry about that. And then they run off. It looks like they just deserted the whole army. And they're cooking a can of beans in the last panel. And meanwhile, the war is going on behind them. And it begs the question, Who are the fools here? Who are the real fools? Now we got another barefoot story by Howard Cruz. This story's called Waters in His Quarters. It's kind of a weird rhyme. Waters in His Quarters. And once again, Howard Cruz just showing this amazing craft. Look at this crazy wall here. Obviously it's some kind of zipatone, but it's just lettering, amazing. But God, I just hate looking at barefoots, and all the characters they're almost repulsive to me. They're so cutesy and weird. Basically, this one, it's like 6 pages, this one. It's like, it's like a sitcom. It's so not funny. Basically, he's got plumbing problems. His apartment's filling up with water. His little roach pals are all in life rafts. The monster under his bed throws frogs at him. If you read Barefoots before, he's got this monster under his bed. Glory. It's a regular character. This is kind of cute, though. We see this memo from Dennis Kitchen. Howard, shouldn't you offer an explanation of who Glory is, since nobody here knows that there's a monster under his bed? And Howard writes back, Dennis, I don't know what Glory is. I thought you knew. That's kind of cute. But then the cops show up. It's not funny at all, guys. Hijinks ensue that aren't very funny. But it just bothers me so much that he's such a good craftsman and he's wasting all of that skill on this crap. I mean, look at that. That looks great, except for barefoots. I hate his girlfriend, too, the way he draws her. That haircut is so stupid. Sorry, guys, if you like barefoots. I guess it's a personal thing, right? So this next one is called Getting the Gooks, written by Ed Goodman and illustrated by Frank Kelly Freese. So that's kind of nice. You get a new drawing by Frank Kelly Freese. It's great illustration. Look how well that plane is drawn. He's just a total master, you know. God, by the 70s, he'd been doing it for decades. And this isn't that great. It's not comics, so who cares? We have another Skip Williamson, Sammy Smoot strip. Aw, heck. And this is very interesting. Sammy is dancing and singing to the lyrics of the song, and he's singing them out. It turns out these lyrics are by John Prine. So it's a John Prine comic strip, at least scripted, you know. Pretty funny stuff. The cannibals can catch me and fry me in a pan, as long as I got my woman. So basically, he's saying, yeah, as long as my white woman's beside me. But of course, then he's putting her in all these horrible situations. So she's about to get eaten by the cannibals. But some great cartooning in this. I love this panel. They could torture me and stretch me like a rubber band as long as I got my woman. So she's getting tortured now because she's with him. Yeah, this is a great 2 pages. Another Joe Beck one-pager, the various brain cells of the human brain. I've seen this done like 50 times in comics. You know, Mad Magazine, like, oh, the weird parts of your brain. And, of course, it's comical, you know. Not that funny. In fact, it's not funny at all. Not my cup of tea. Now we have Oscar O.K. Kabibler in 1999 by Bruce Walters. If you're not familiar with him, he did tons of stuff for Kitchen Sink. And if you remember, Dennis Kitchen edits this magazine. So these are filled with all the guys who were in Snarf and, you know, all of his comics. Don't really like this comic very much. It's kind of interesting, though. One day, I'll call him Oscar. Oscar finds 3 unusual subway entrances. One says truth, one says justice, one says the American way. He picks the American way. And it says, you are now entering the year 1999. And it turns into this allegory about just the American way of life. This car pulls up in front of him. This smooth-talking guy comes out, says, "Hop in, pal. Just sign on the dotted line. Low down payments, easy terms." And Oscar, agrees. And he's having a great time driving this car around. It's a pretty cool car. But then he starts running out of gas. It's the gas crisis, remember? This is 1974, so he's got to wait for like 2 hours on this line. The gas is like $600, which he doesn't have the money for. So the car goes on autopilot and drives him to the Military and Industrial Complex Incorporated. And the soldiers there order him to get out. And he's basically assigned to this horrible menial job. He just has to watch commercials all day and report on them. And we see the weeks pass by. He's getting more frazzled. And then 2 years later. So it just looks like he's going to be stuck there forever. Interesting cartoonist. Definitely nobody draws quite like him. It's kind of neat. I could totally picture him having like a Sunday comic strip, in the newspapers. This is interesting. This next one is Fleischer Brothers, Inc. And it's just a kind of a history of the Fleischer Brothers, the great animators of the 20s and 30s and 40s. It's written and drawn by Leslie Carbaja. And it's kind of a true story about, how they rose to prominence, but it's also, she fills it with lots of gags. She even says, the incidents depicted are true. The dialogue, however, is merely speculative, which means she just makes funny dialogue for all of the incidents here. I guess Max Fleischer invented rotoscoping, and no studio cared. They didn't want it. Finally, the Bray studio bought in, and he started making the Coco the Clown shorts, started making Betty Boop cartoons, and then they took off. I guess the actress that they based Betty Boop on, she sued them. There was a big court trial, but they won. Then they started doing Popeye, and then they really took off. I guess they had a strike, and they totally busted the strike. They were typical businessmen of the time. They were like, "Fuck you. Union schmunion." And they relocate to Florida. Their first feature film, Gulliver's Travels, is a success, but their second was a big flop. And so with less money, their cartoons get shittier, and they go out of business. Well, basically Paramount, who kind of owned them, they give them the boot. And they lived unhappily ever after. I guess after that, none of them had any success. A really fun story, really interesting. Really like the cartooning too. I did want to point out just how great this, I forgot to mention, how great that logo is. That's why Leslie Carbaja didn't do many underground comics, because she was too busy getting nice, juicy accounts from book publishers, graphic design work. We have another Kim Deitch story, Cabbage Fiend, and this stars Krishna Horowitz as well. We see Krishna on a date with this vegetarian woman. He orders a hamburger, so she kind of poo-poos him. She says, "You should give vegetarian food a chance. It's more humane." He says, "Humane? Listen up. You're talking to an ex-vegetarian. Me and my friend used to go out all the time, and we would bring a record player and play the same record, the Teddy Bear Picnic. It worked like a charm. The cabbages couldn't resist, and all the cabbages would come out dancing. And it was my job to bonk them on the head. And after months of doing this, I could barely sleep at night. I felt so guilty. And I lost 30 pounds. So don't tell me about humane." Such a crazy story. She's like, "You really expect me to believe that?" It's like, yeah. It's like, that's the stupidest story I've ever heard. But just great Kim Deitch. Kim Deitchery. Here we have another prose piece. This is by Will Fowler, and it's illustrated by S. Clay Wilson. Let me flip this. The editorial mentions that it wasn't supposed to be sideways, but S. Clay Wilson was just, too high or drunk that day and just fucked up. And they didn't want to go through the work of reformatting it or anything like that. Very nice, typical, nasty, as Clay Wilson business going on there. There's actually a really good story. I was reading this on the bus. I almost missed my stop because I was like really enthralled by it. So here we have another Spiegelman reprint. This is the original Mouse short story that was kind of the testing ground for the Mouse graphic novel. Not literally. I mean, I think at the time he just thought, yeah, this is a nice one-off. But he obviously thought about it over the years and turned it into Mouse. This was originally from Funny Animals Comics, the Underground. So this is a really, I love the art in this. Obviously very different than the graphic novel, more illustrative. And it's basically very similar, though. We see a father telling his son a bedtime story. He's like, I'm going to tell you about my time in the war in Europe. And we can see all the basics of Mouse are there. The Jews are mice. The Nazis are cats. And he's talking about the ghetto and hiding from the Nazis, just like in Mouse. A lot of these anecdotes are, that are just mentioned at a panel are totally fleshed out in the graphic novel. Yeah, it's really great. I love this art. And basically, when he gets to the point in the story where they're delivered to Mauschwitz, he says, I can't tell you anymore now. And he's crying. And he says, good night, son. It's time for you to go to sleep. Here we have another Tim Boxall strip, Things That Go Bump in the Toy Box. I gotta say, Tim Boxall has such a disturbing art style. It's actually very straight, but everything's a little off. It's almost like Graham Ingles, where like maybe the eyes are too close together or too far apart, but everyone looks just a little, I don't know, dead-eyed or creepy. This is pretty goofy. It's almost like a Mad article, but it's a little more twisted. It's basically telling kids about how they should treat their toys, but it's like really absurd. Like it says, electric trains. Never play with your trains near the water. The little people that work on your train all come from the Midwest. They really resent having the track set up near water or anything that reminds them of California or New York, and they'll get even the first chance they get. And this kid's in the bathtub, and the train derails itself and electrocutes him by plunging into the water. They're all just like this. It's very odd, absurdist humor. It's kind of funny, though. This one is by a guy named Peter Loft, and he's in some of the Dennis Kitchen published titles. Very obvious, you can see, very classic animated cartoon style. It looks like he could have drawn for Dell Comics. It actually reminds me of Mike Cazalet a lot, that guy who did Captain Jack for Fantagraphics in the 80s and stuff for Critters. His whole career was just drawing in that old Warner Brothers cartoon style. This is really not funny at all, and just, it's pretty bad. But I gotta say, this guy's got a flair for doing that style. Looks like he could draw Hong Kong Phooey for Gold Key. Maybe he did. Hong Kong Phooey was published around then. Next, we have another Skip Williamson page, True Life Cartoons. And there's just some weird little story about a guy picking up a hitchhiker and then ranting to him. All about protecting your wrists. It's an obsession of his. It's very odd. Once again, some pretty nice cartooning. And now we have part 2 of We Fellow Travelers, the Justin Green continuing series. And I think I'm just as confused by this episode as I was by the first. So where we left off, these two brothers are in the Saw Church of Profanity. The handyman there takes a liking to him. He says, I'm going to give you guys the full tour. And he sets up this ladder, and they go down to this basement. There's all this crazy shit down there. And he shows them a film he made, The Cuss Cross and Its Saw. And it's really odd. Just talking about Jesus and talking about his popularity. It's really interesting, but it's also just nuts. It's almost like a self-help book mixed with crazy Catholicism. Just all this random stuff. It's so bizarre. But to be honest, I'm not sure. This is like definitely one of Justin Green's most like opaque stories, where it's just like I don't really get it, but it's really interesting trying to decipher what he's talking about because he's Justin Green. So when the movie ends, the handyman's gone. They're like, "What the hell?" And the ladder's gone. And they look up and they see the handyman there, and they're like, "Hey, fork over the ladder, Pops." And he says, "Call me Rector, son." And then it says to be continued. So maybe I'll figure it out by next episode. I think it's the last one, next issue. We have another short shrift page with some strips. We have Oscar OK Kabibler again by Bruce Walters. Very unfunny. This is great though. Weird Creatures by Basil Wolverton. Oh, look how good his art is. This is so nice. The ancient mole men of Mars always stuck their heads out of the ground at 8 a.m. At 8:01 a.m., a wide creature called the Flying Razorblade soared over, neatly beheading the mole men, whose necks made excellent chimneys for other underground Martians. It's like, God, Basil Wolverton was pretty close to death at this point. I don't think he lived that much longer after this. And but look how good his chops are. He's an old man. But his writings get even weirder. This is just so bizarre. But it's funny as hell. I think it's great. Next, we have a Sharon Rudolph strip, A Visit from the Folks. And we have a little Barefoots strip by Howard Cruz. I hate that guy so much. Once again, we have an ad for Comix book, which is kind of like a nice, another Dennis Kitchen pinup. And we have a back cover of Barefoots by Howard Cruz, my nemesis. Oh, God, I hate the way he draws her and him, but her more so. But look at this. I'm pretty sure this is Howard Cruz doing the coloring. It looks a little too wonky for like your Marvel professional to do the separations on this. But he's trying out some stuff. Just that tree's well drawn. I love this last panel here. The moon has got this crazy pointillistic face. The galaxy in the background, that looks great, except for these guys. Like, if you could just do this. Like, I just want to make a Barefoots without Barefoots, just like Garfield without Garfield, where all you'd see is Howard Cruz's amazing craftsmanship, and you wouldn't have to look at these fuckers. So that's maybe I'm going to start working on that. I'll do that this very same night. That's a good idea, actually. So there you go, guys. Comix book number 2. Hope you enjoyed looking at it. I'm really digging this. It's, yeah, sure, there's some turds in here, but there's some great stuff. Just the fact that every issue has new Kim Deitch stuff and Justin Green stuff, 2 of my favorite underground cartoonists of all time, that's worth having some Barefoots in it. But I wish they weren't in there. So thanks for watching, and I hope to see you next time here at the Herculespetix Academy of Comic Book Studies.